Welcome back to this episode of the Strong and Kind podcast. This episode is with Zac Kongonis. Zac is a strength coach, strength and conditioning coach out of Australia. We had a really awesome conversation about his athletic background, what got him into strength and conditioning, and where he's at in his overarching arc of coaching at this point. We got into data-driven approaches. We got into speed and velocity training in barbell sports and in athletics. It was a really great talk with Zac. I really appreciated his take, and I hope you do too. Check it out. Appreciate you being here. Thanks so much. I don't want to skip. All right, so
You don't want
Zac,
to miss the riffing.
it's yeah, dude. I always start riffing, and then it's like, oh, dude, that was 5 good minutes, right? But it's okay. So I was just kind of mentioning how I found Zac, and this is the power of like Instagram and the internet, because, and I also said that like every time I read Zac stuff, I just feel dumb, and I mean that in like the best way, because like I'm a physical therapist, like I'm not brilliant, but like I understand a lot of stuff, to some extent, but like I do appreciate like nuanced takes, um, but I kind of go like your athletic background. I think you came
Yep,
from like powerlifting, and then
spot
I
on.
assume you got bored as shit because that's what happens. And then you're like, I want to do something different. And then you got more into maybe Olympic lifting, and then more into like sprints and just general athletic development. And as it pertains to making people better athletes for whatever sport they choose. But is that correct? Is that your general arc?
You have nailed the pedigree. So you can go back a little further before the powerlifting. I think
Mm-hmm.
I first got into the gym. I was track and field when I was really young. So
Yeah.
from probably up until like 15, 16, I was high jump, long jump, triple jump, and sprinting. But I
Okay.
ended up getting a really bad grade spondylolisthesis and
Okay.
spondylolysis of the L5. And that kind of sent me down this bit of a weird path to, all right, I can't really jump or high jump anymore because it's painful. The physio suggested, hey, maybe get into the gym, start lifting some weights. And that's what I ended up doing. Then just became a massive bodybuilder rat, wearing the stringers, you have the pre workout. And that was pretty much my first structured introduction to the gym. During that, I eventually, ended up enjoyed lifting heavy and doing all that stuff. So started going down powerlifting, then worked in powerlifting and trained powerlifting for probably close to 8, 9 years. So it was a pretty decent stint. And then, yeah, after that, started to get bored, ended up meeting Brandon, took a liking to weightlifting, did that for a couple of years, then wanted to get back into the sprinting stuff after, I lost a good chunk of weight after the powerlifting. I enjoyed how the Olympic lifting ended up making me feel. And we thought, you know what? Let's get back into sprinting. And then over the last 2, 3 years, have pretty much just been all in on that. And that definitely bled into the way that I programmed, who I wanted to work with, and what prescriptions I enjoyed giving out.
Yeah. It's I don't I think I had followed you long enough, and I'm like, all right, so I'm gonna try to get this guy's arc. And I mean, it's such a I don't know. I think people, I was a high school athlete, not gifted in any way, shape, or form. I love playing sports though. I still love playing sports. Um, I hated the weight room. I was mortified in there because my first few exposures, like I think I just got like kicked in the teeth where I thought I was gonna be like kind of strong, and I just didn't know
Mm.
how to move. And like you're in a weight room with 60 other guys, and it's just like if you look like if your squat looks super ugly and like it looks like you're in pain, like nobody really knows how to like correct you per se, other than like, yeah, just try to get deeper, right? And but then I found CrossFit, and I'm like, all right, this is cool because it's just a kick in the pants, and I could run. I could run. I was probably You posted the other day like I'm just a chill guy who's looking to do power cleans and run fast. I was like the opposite. I'm just like trying to run as far as I can because I can suffer. But and then it's like, yeah, like, and then you kind of go through, okay, there's the powerlifting arc. It's just get super strong, right? And then your joints hurt all the time, and you're like, what the hell am I doing? And this is unnuanced, but that's most powerlifters. Like, why do my joints hurt all the time? Well, you're YOLO in your lifts every day, and you're not training any other physical qualities besides your ability to like grind stuff out, right? And maybe 3 sets of 10 bicep curls, right? Um, but what I've liked, what I think is cool about like you and Brandon and Angus, and then I think you were on Will Rattel talked to you recently, and like Will Rattel is just a monster. But it's like, dude, you should be sprinting. Like you should be pursuing some of these things that people stop doing, frankly, when they're like 25. They just don't do them again. So I think one of the ones that blew my mind, I'm trying to think of, there's like one that blew my mind. But just give me like your philosophy, I guess, or your worldview at this time. That like, you know how like maybe you wanted to help like the 22-year-old version of you? Like if you could go back in time and be like, hey, 22-year-old version of me, this is what I would tell you to do. What does that look like for you?
That's a really good question. I reckon if I could go back, if I went back a little bit further, I would have just said, don't
No, only
stop
22,
pursuing the
not 16. No, I'm joking. I'm joking.
don't stop pursuing the thing you enjoy the most, which for me was track and field.
Yeah.
And when I eventually got injured and went down that whole path of rehab, I wish I was able to get better advice. And I wish that there was people who I could talk to, like you said, the power of the internet, like people and influencers who I see and talk to every day now. I wish those influencers were around when I was going through that because I never would have given up the track and field stuff. And
Yeah.
I think that eventually people are forced to make a decision, whether it's with bad advice or whether they just believe they can't progress anymore to move on. And I think that, like with me for the powerlifting, there's definitely a point where you need to move on if it's not serving you or if you're not enjoying it. But if you're enjoying something and it's serving you, but you've met some hardship with it that you need to kind of, either make the choice to leave it behind or keep trucking through, I'd say just keep trucking through, especially if you're enjoying it. Because for
Yeah.
me now, I've done so many things. I've trained for a long time. I've done all these different things. And I was good at powerlifting. I was never the best. I'm going to be a moderate sprinter. I'll never run under 11 seconds, but
Don't
just
say that.
doing it and
Don't say that,
enjoying
Zach.
it.
I believe in you.
Oh,
Don't say that.
honestly, if I run under 11 seconds, I will run naked past the busiest street in
All
Melbourne.
right, I'm gonna send you some performance enhancing drugs, and we'll make that happen. No, yeah, no, I think it's good to have like your actual realistic limitation. I'm also just like a big believer in just don't fucking limit yourself. Just see, right? And I get what you're saying, right? But yeah, I'm with you. Dude, it's so wild to me how I think what I've really enjoyed out of like your takes and stuff is like being more athletic is only going to help you in any pursuit you take on. And if you enjoy powerlifting, great, right? But like if you sprinting or learning to power clean or just taking a little bit of a sidestep into like more power development can keep you healthier and fresher so you can enjoy the thing. I don't see why you wouldn't do that, but I still think there's so many people who are just so dogmatic in their approach that they never adjust. And that's my big thing
Mm.
with what I'm seeing with more and more people, right? What are your takes on that?
Well, I think that people, whenever they get into areas of high specificity, they always assume that the maximum dosage that you can facilitate of an activity is what you need to be doing to progress.
Yeah.
And I agree with that in instances of people who are performing at the highest level. Like the person who is running the fastest, the person who is cleaning the most, they're the people who can facilitate the most specific volume and they do it. But the key word is that if you can facilitate it. Like I know a lot of, for lack of a better word, mediocre athletes who are trying to facilitate massive amounts of specific volume and it's just bringing negative consequences. I
Hmm.
think for the majority of people on that bell curve of performance where they're just training to enjoy it and improve performance, you don't need to be at that level of volume towards the activity. You can do, be within 80% of that maximum recoverable volume and leave 20% aside to, father and foster these other qualities that, as you said, will help you increase longevity and be able to do it for longer. And for a lot of these sports, that the rate of attrition is what defines how good you are. Can you
Yeah.
sprint every week for 10 years? You
Yeah.
will get faster. It's
Yeah.
just a time frames game.
Yeah. No, I think the time frame game, the hard thing to accept as a 36-year-old man is I wish I would have found this shit at 16. Right? Like, or I wish I would have just what it really came down to, and like I don't care. I'm not like mad, but speed is still not really looked at like a lot of people as a trainable quality to some extent, right?
Mm.
Especially like I was basically just told like, dude, your first three steps are so slow. And like, well, nobody helped me understand that I could get better at that. And so now I'm like, well, shit, like, and I'm actually like getting faster at 36. And that's the hard part is just we just get in our own somebody says something and we get in our own way. But what you mentioned there about just like people who are decent athletes but they're trying to like really maximize their specificity. It's like, well, there should be phases where you improve your athleticism. Like it's a simplistic view, but like make your base bigger so that you can develop more specific qualities. But what people think about making their base bigger is just doing 3 sets of 10, doing some quote unquote volume work, as opposed to like, no, go freaking run some sprints. Like I'm really enjoying like more sprinting, but I also think it's like people who snatch and clean and jerk really well. Like, dude, there's football players that have never really like snatched or clean and jerked, but they just sprint a lot and they play like football and they're just already gonna like out snatch and clean and jerk me just because they're like more powerful and they just know how to move. And like I'm seeing that already. Like my power clean has gone up, and I think it is because of, yes, power cleaning, but like my sprinting performance, if that makes sense.
There's definitely a case to be made for global adaptations. And I think that it can definitely be taken too far because then you get down the
Yeah.
rabbit hole of the argument of, oh, if I get stronger, everything gets better. If I
Yeah.
run faster, everything gets better.
Yes.
And I don't believe that. But I believe that if you're looking at some limiting potentials is the word that I love to come back to for these.
Yeah.
There's eventually going to be a point where your best quality is going to be limited by your worst.
Yeah.
And whatever that relationship is, if something is so abysmally deficient that it's interfering with your ability to push your best outcome, that thing needs to become your highest priority.
Yeah.
Because I believe that everything's linked to a certain extent. And say for your aerobic health to limit your maximum strength or power, you have to be pretty unfit.
You would
Like it
be,
has to be pretty bad
yeah.
to cause that relationship to happen.
Yeah.
And like you said, coming back to phases where you take stock of those limiting potentials and say, all right, is anything too far in the toilet?
Yeah.
Can we bring it up just so not that it's on par? I don't expect everyone to be having these, beautiful relationships where they're running a 2 minute kilometer and then they're power cleaning 180 and then they're sprinting 10 set. Like, no, it's all right. If you want to be decent at something, you can't be horrible at anything.
Yeah.
If
No.
you want to be amazing at something, you got to be relatively good at everything.
Yeah.
And those relationships stay together.
Yeah. I love that. Well, and I think there's also just like, so yeah, because I'm like a physio, I also just think like, dude, if you feel like shit, hop on a bike for 20 minutes and you're probably not going to feel like shit anymore. Like hop on a bike and just pedal for like 20 minutes and you're not probably going to feel like shit anymore. And it's just like
Yeah.
kind of that like state change of doing something that's just different from what you've just constantly exposing yourself to. I think like like Angus always just like said, like if you're a really like extended person, just pump more flexion into the system and see what happens. I'm like, yeah, actually, I think that can be useful, right? But like, there's like what you're mentioning is like you would have to be in really, really shitty cardiovascular like health for it to affect your top end strength. But if it could just be slightly tuned up a little bit, you're probably going to feel better overall, which is going to increase your performance, even if it's just perception, right? Um, what so you've mentioned you've talked about like KPIs, right? Or just key performance indicators. And I'm not asking you to like take an individualistic approach here, but like making somebody more powerful, right? Somebody comes to you and they're like, you kind of identify, they want to get stronger. Everybody just wants to get stronger. They want to get, they want everything. Everybody wants everything, right? But like, what are
Hmm.
your kind of your KPIs or what are your tests that you're looking at people and be like, these are some things that I want to measure. And I get that it's individual, but like, what are your thoughts around that?
So I definitely gravitate more towards the test side of things and the KPI side of things. But the
Okay.
first things that I'm looking at is can they run or accelerate? Like,
Yeah.
how does their first 5 to 10 steps look? Another thing would probably be I'd put a power clean in there. If I tell you to do a hang clean, how you approach that problem probably is going to tell me a lot about how you move as an athlete and a person. I'm going to ask you to squat and to hinge because I need to move forward with the assumption that you have basic control over some of these functions. And you could definitely chuck, a press, a pull, a lunge, and some sort of rotation in there as just a general touch point because I have to move forward assuming that you're competent in being able to move because I've made that mistake before and I didn't. I thought, oh, everyone can squat relatively well. And it doesn't mean like, oh, max out your low bar, but
Yeah.
can you make your pelvis and rib cage move down without falling over and come
Yeah.
back up with a relative load in some position? Um, I'd probably look at some form of plyometric bound, probably not a hop. I'd probably either go like a leap, a broad jump, some sort of box jump, maybe more of a elastic based jump, and maybe more of just a concentric slower jump, and maybe just like a really rough assault bike 20-second push and
I
just
got
see
you.
what happens.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't put general aerobic conditioning in that bucket just because you can kind of tell someone's fitness just by looking at them move. Like if they're a little bit soft, they don't do any sort of aerobic activity, you can kind of assume that it's poor.
Yeah.
Like
Got you.
to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Um, and even from just a basic 20 to 30-second bike test, you can kind of tell the base level of someone's fitness.
Yeah.
But again, in my current model, I'm definitely focused more on the power side. So when I'm addressing and assessing, I'm writing a new ebook out, and that enduring side is definitely coming more into it. It's just a side that I haven't focused on as much. So if you talk to me in another year, I'll probably have, different things to say about that, but it's just where I'm at currently. But those are the things I'd probably go with: acceleration, an elastic jump, a concentrically oriented jump, basic squat, hinge, push, pull patterns, and make them do a hang clean and see what happens.
I like it. No, and then like this is the thing. It's like you didn't say anything groundbreaking there, but you covered a lot of the awesome bases and like it is cool. It is wild, and I will say this as somebody who's power clean was shitty for a long time. Like I had buddies who just like could power clean, and then it's like damn, and they were good athletes, right? And so it's like okay, how do I figure out how to do this, well? And I also just think like this is a practiced we're practicing. You can get better at a lot of this stuff. You just have to be willing to like practice it, right? Um,
Mm.
when it comes to like I'm looking I actually pulled up your ebook because I'm probably just gonna buy it after this. So just shameless plug there for Zach's got an ebook, Exploratory Movement, which I like. I like that idea. What like I guess I will say like partial squats with a power emphasis type of stuff. That's some stuff that I've seen you do, but like where it like challenges my bias of like full range or
Mm.
really fast bench press. Like and I've seen Brandon Accardi talk about some of this stuff as well. But like why are those tools that you're really trying to inject into maybe people who haven't been exposed to them? Why, what led you guys? I'm kind of grouping you and Brandon into this because I just kind of see it from both of you. But like, what made you guys be like, these are things that are measurable and useful, and they're also kind of like, they're well, especially like in Olympic lifting, like having people bench press is not necessarily like a normal thing for. It might be for like general strength development type of thing, but it's not necessarily what a whole lot of Olympic lifters are going to spend any time doing. But why could something like that be beneficial? Or why could a partial squat with maybe a really fast eccentric be beneficial? Because those are, again, things that I think it was you. This is one of the big things that made me want to talk about it. I think it was you who posted the Romanian deadlift was like supposed to be about moving fast in the eccentric phase. Maybe it wasn't you. Now that and maybe it's not. Sorry, I'm getting
Nah, that
getting
wasn't
my
me.
influencers. I'm getting my influencers mixed up. But anyway, which I did like that argument. I'm like, yeah, I haven't thought about that. Everybody's just doing their RDL slow, but to some extent, like it could be a really good eccentric training tool. But anyway,
Mm.
I don't know if I asked you a question right there. Did any of that make sense? What I just asked?
You
Yeah.
definitely did.
Okay.
So what I distill that out to kind of just repeat it, just so I'm on the right track, is those more. I I'm struggling with the word speed strength because it's what it is, but I don't like the terminology, but we'll run with that.
It's
Like
hard
I do
because like
like, yeah.
it's hard because the force velocity curve is so kind of mainstream, but like most I don't really like it. I don't think it's an actual
Mm.
like good descriptor of what you're trying to do. It makes it seem like there's just this nice like curvilinear progression type thing. And it's just that's not really how it works, right?
Well, if we'll take a slight detour to that curve, because this kind
Yeah.
of reinforces what I'll say later, the thing that people don't talk about is as you go through that force velocity curve, as eccentric speeds increase, force increases as well.
Yeah.
So people say,
Yeah.
oh, the like a heavy deadlift is the highest expression of force. It's like, no, no. As rotational speeds during the eccentric increase, static force production can increase up to like 2 times your max normal, like in a other, sorry, I butchered that. The force output can be double that of a static strength movement. I just want to be really purposeful with my words here because I want to do these concepts justice.
Yeah.
The faster you can dive into a rep, as soon as you increase those elastic responses, force outputs go through the roof. And I feel like people miss the other side of that curve because you can train all of these things in lots of different ways. You can
Yeah.
have more concentric tissue oriented strategies, or you can have more eccentrically biased strategies. And you can go through how a lot of tissues have these elastic components. It's not just tendons and ligaments that are helping transfer these forces, the tissues do it as well. But
Hmm.
let's not forget that fast eccentric speeds can be really important to producing one, high power outputs, and two, really high force outputs. And that bleeds really well into that question of partial range work. Those, I call them meme variations, where you're just coming in hot and blasting it.
Yeah.
And the thing that it comes back to is time frames. In This is something that I might regret saying. I don't love the partial range stuff for strength work. I don't
Okay.
hate it, but if you take somebody who can do a 300 kilo full range squat really, really well, they could probably quarter squat off pins north of 400 kilos.
Hmm.
Like that partial range strength isn't unique to just training partial range strength.
Yeah.
Someone who's strong is strong through the entire range.
Yeah.
However, somebody who is super strong can't express that strength really quickly in every instance. Like people make the false equivalence that if you get stronger, you move lighter weights quicker, and that is just 100% incorrect
Yeah. Yeah.
because expressing those speeds is a skill and an adaptation into itself, irrespective of current strength.
Yeah. Is that that was one of the big takeaways from I can't remember if it was strength is specific. I can't remember if that's Chris Beardsley or the other guy who talks about muscle a lot and stuff. But like the
Hmm.
specific velocities, ranges of motion and stuff like that. Like yeah, people don't like you're right. Like somebody who can full range of motion squat XYZ is probably going to partial range, have a really good turnover to a partial range movement. But their ability to do it maybe quickly is a different output that if you don't train that, you're not going to get to do. And like that, okay, again, this is a Brandon and Cardi thing, but I'm assuming you're on the same page. Like power is in your brain type of thing, right? Like that you got to train your brain to express. And like that's probably been one of my biggest takeaways in the past 3 or 4, I don't know, 6 months is like and
Mm.
that's I think it ties into what you're saying really well is expressing like taking a weight where it's like 80% and learning to move it a lot faster is going to be actually super beneficial for like developing your capacity as a lifter as opposed to just always trying to like YOLO like get a little bit higher like add 2 kilos to the bar, which I think what gets a lot of probably what you would consider intermediate like Olympic lifters stuck is they're struggling to add a kilo or two for a long time when if they just worked at that, let's call it 70 to 80% and try to get really fast with that or move it really well, that would probably help them express higher force output or a higher top end. Is that correct? Is that
Mm.
like your line of thinking there?
Yes, but I think when we move into this territory, you can't have the discussion without bringing up tracking these metrics.
Ooh,
Because,
okay.
like you said, a lot of these things are super specific. And when we're looking at saying, cool, moving a certain weight quicker, it isn't always necessarily tied to velocity. And like a lot of the stuff that we're talking about with power, we're talking about the metric of power output itself. And it's about saying we have these power and these force curves, and all we're trying to do at a certain weight is shift them to the left. Like, at what point do we experience peak power in the lift? How high is peak power? And can we achieve that sooner? And there's two ways to do it. You either do it by shortening the range exponentially, because I mean, that will narrow that gap. You'll express power quicker over a shorter range because there's less space to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Add more of an elastic component, which is, say, those meme benches or the banded box squats at those lighter weights, because you're training the tissue's capacity to manage eccentric forces, turn it around, and push it back out. That can't happen at super heavy weights just because people aren't good at it. Like, you're just not. People
Yeah.
aren't generally very elastic within the tissues themselves, and people aren't able to produce these really fast impulses. Like, for an example, if we're talking about, have you seen the like really bouncy, funny meme clean pull? I posted up a couple days ago. Like, it
I
bounces off your
probably have.
thighs and you just ripping it like a lawnmower,
Yeah.
ripping it like a lawnmower. To quote some numbers for that, I've had myself and some of my athletes hitting power values close to about 4,000 watts, and hitting those power metrics within about 30 milliseconds. Like, it's taking 30 milliseconds to go from that bar careening towards your thighs at Mach 10 to hitting the peak power output that you can produce in 30 milliseconds, which is quick.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that is fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can't produce those metrics in anything other than variations which have those elastic eccentric components. On
Yeah.
a different corner, say you're taking a trap bar deadlift off of blocks, you can probably produce similar, maybe 3 or 4,000 watts in someone who's relatively well trained with it. Of course, those numbers can be higher depending on how strong they are, what they can do. But the time frames you're ripping that off in a purely concentric fashion, maybe 150 milliseconds. So really quick. It's super quick,
Yeah.
but
Not.
low compared to the other things.
Yeah. Yeah. Not.
And you can build it out. And when you have these graphs and you're looking at peak power, you kind of have two ways to train it. It's either low velocity or high velocity power. Because if you're training power at about 90% at peak, 90% of peak power, it's a bell curve. It's a big old little archy thing. You have 2 points there. You either have 90% towards the left or 90% towards the right. And those little distinctions really show, all right, what am I training and how am I training it? And you can't understand that without the numbers to back it. It's not necessarily about saying, I'm going to move this arbitrary weight quicker. It's about saying, what weight do I need to use to push these curves to the left, decrease the time frames I have to produce power,
Mm-hmm.
and do it effectively and succinctly over time.
So, and your only way to do that is for velocity-based training, correct?
Acceleration based training.
Excel. Oh, yeah.
Velocity, that acceleration based training is the new. It's like anything that I'm looking at now.
Yeah.
Velocity is like cool. Like, it's there, it's cool, but it's not as changeable as the acceleration metrics. And acceleration is what you care about. Like, I don't
Yeah.
really care how fast the bar moves,
Yeah.
but if I can accelerate a barbell at 50 meters a second squared, she's flying. Like, I'm doing something correct to do that. And if acceleration's high, velocity's high. But the inverse can't be true.
Not
Just
necessarily true.
because velocity's high doesn't necessarily mean acceleration's high.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point and a very good point of distinction. So, yeah, man, I think that's what has kind of blown my mind the past couple weeks. Or not blown my mind, but it's like it just makes you think. It's just like it's just getting. I'm not like the most detail oriented person, like to some extent. I just kind of like to like but I think this is the type of stuff that it shows up that you can create a program, or you can create a plan that when you feel like you're lost, or few people feel like they're stuck, you actually have something that's a variable that like you can basically be like, yeah, let's adjust this and let's hit some of this stuff that is typically so different from like what people have been thinking about or doing that it like is really something that like it kind of gamifies it re-gamifies the process, right? Because you can get stuck in I gotta lift more kilos or I gotta like do like you just described a variable that like we can actively work on that and measure that we can hopefully improve. It'll improve other qualities as well. So
Mm.
super I
It
gotta
if I
go ahead.
jump in there quickly as well,
Yeah.
it also just stops you having to guess. Like
Yes.
this level of detail orientation, I never used to be like this. I used to actively say, "Oh, it's just complicating training. You write the program, you respond to variables, you see how they're feeling, you make choices." And I go back through some of the old programs that I've written, and I physically feel bad because I was just guessing. And luckily for me, I'm inclined for training to make good choices. Like I kind of get it. I understand movement. I understand sport because I've played it for a long time. And I was just lucky enough to fall upon a gradual process that worked. But now the level of tracking and detail, I can go back and say, what am I improving? Did I improve it? What can I alter to make it better next time? And it just creates a process that I can sit there and say to somebody, this is why you got better. Whereas the person who just relies on putting extra kilos on the bar, they don't really have that ability to define what worked because they've made over the course of a block 50 choices.
Yeah.
And maybe 10 of them might have been correct and worked in spite of the 40 that were horrible choices. Whereas now I can make over the course of 20 weeks of programming six choices, six
Yeah.
choices informed by data that are trackable and loggable. And I can just watch them move. I can just watch them go up. If something plateaus, I only have six little switchboards to change, as opposed
Yeah.
to looking at this god awful mess and saying, what do I change?
Yeah.
What do I do?
Yeah. No, it's wild. It's like I think you just said something really important there. It's like in anything, it's I think there is a ton. Okay, so this is where I think it matters, right? There's a ton of guesswork that people convey certainty around when they're not certain, right? And
Yep.
so and that's where I have accepted, and this is probably what's gonna like this talking to you is gonna change, is like because there's always going to be uncertainty in an uncertain process like what we're doing, right? But we want to convey as much real certainty oriented around variables that we feel like we can manipulate compared to this is just my process and it works, right? And so much I posted
Mm-hmm.
it today, like I love coaching people and I really do lean into the interpersonal side of coaching. Like I'm probably more of like a life coach who like likes strength and conditioning to some extent. But because I also think it's an awesome tool for that type of stuff. But in rehab also you really want to modulate and you want to manage variables while accepting like the uncertainty of you got to put forth effort, right? No plan is perfect, especially if you suck at implementing the plan. If you're not gonna like show up and try hard, that's kind of I'm gonna make a rant on this in the near future. It's like if you expect the program to just do the work for you, you're not really freaking doing it right, right? And I think we're
Mm.
also that's a lot of where we're at in like the current era is like people think that the program is just gonna magically make them stronger, right? Without like actually trying really hard. And I think you just have to try. I like Will Rattel because I think Will Rattel actually he's gifted first and foremost, but I also think he just tries really hard.
Mm.
And he's also really smart. And he also is just I think he just enjoys training, which that also makes it easier. But like what you just said, like, yeah, is if we can figure out what levers actually to pull, then we can take a lot of the guesswork out and it creates so much more clarity and clarity tends to lean to give us good things, right?
100%.
When it comes to okay, we've talked about it a couple times, but like um you had a spondy from associated with tracking, right? And dude, I this is why I'm doing what I'm doing is because the rehab process in a lot of ways is so shitty, and it really just needs to be like better S&C most of the time, right? Um, but like, what are the things? And because you really don't, there's no special exercises. There's just like figure out the aggravators and the easers, and get people moving in those things. But um What were like, because I'm sure at one point you were like scared and you felt like you were broken. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe you didn't feel like this, but
Yep.
you were luckily you had somebody that was like, yeah, go to the gym and start to lift because it's going to make you stronger and a bigger, a more robust organism. Let's just say that. But like, what were the things that maybe mentally you had to overcome in that journey? Or what was the epiphany that like you weren't jacked up? Maybe that's what I want to know too.
It stopped hurting. Like
Yeah.
after a year and a half in the gym, it just stopped hurting. And I mean, I was young, and as good as the physio was to say go to the gym, it was caveated by, oh no, you can't do high jump anymore. Because for me, high jump was my jam. I cleared like 189 when I was like 15. So I was quite good at it. Like I'm 6'2". I was lit slender man. I got no torso, real long femurs. Like I'm built for that. Um, and he said, "Look, you can't do that anymore. This was the direct cause of the pain. Start going to the gym, get stronger, pick something else." And I was like, "All right." I mean, I'm not getting surgery. That's good because we
Yeah.
saw a couple of surgeons and they were like, "Oh, no, let's get in there. Let's put some bolts in there." And
Yeah.
luckily, we didn't make that choice.
Yeah.
But yeah, after a year of training and for some background, my deadlift, oh, it looks like a cat taking, like it looks like a dog taking a poop. Horrible.
Yeah.
Like just I pulled a lot of weight in the most horrible looking position ever. Never hurt me once. And I realized that was the epiphany, like, oh, this doesn't hurt anymore. But at that point, I'd already put on 35 kilos of tissue. I was deep in powerlifting. So the thought of going back to track just wasn't there. But once the pain's gone, you've kind of done your job. And I
Yeah.
haven't had a relapse. I don't get any back pain. I haven't had back pain in a very long time. Um, I think that answers the question. It just stopped
Yeah.
hurting.
I mean, that's the best part about it is like if and I think it's so it's weird because um I have a couple people on my it really kind of depends on like what you're told, right? And you at least were given like a partially optimistic view. I've had a
Yes,
few people it's like, man, they were told never to do like multiple things that they loved again. And it's like, okay, like and
that's
it's like,
rough.
hey, who gives you that? Who gives you like who has the gall to say that type of shit? Unless it was like a catastrophic thing, right? Um,
Yeah.
but the yeah, once you start to give somebody that like glimmer of okay, this can get better, and you stop feeling it as often or as bad, and obviously like high jump like to know yeah it could have been the number one contributor but there was still probably multiple factors going on there and that is kind of where the milieu of like training is kind of good is because like there's just so many variables like it's like if you're feeling good about like how much your biceps are growing it could contribute to the fact that you just don't care so much about your back pain and that keeps you training and XYZ right um but I think it's just important, like when I've seen you talk about like good training, right? And also like you don't like one of the hardest parts from a marketing standpoint for me is like I'm just not conveying like the bullshit that I think people have been told for so long that they think they need it. Like, oh,
Mm.
I need to do this for recovery, or I need to have this to rehab. And it's like, no, you just have to like be okay with, you know, a little bit of pain as you go through the discomfort or the uncomfortable period of like just starting to build your body up and calm things down and build things up. But I think that's a really important note that like you just started going to the gym and it went away over time, right? Yeah, I don't really have any deeper insights. I guess maybe like you should just be an honorary physio at this point because you probably would do a better job than most people. Do you
Well,
get people?
it's a simple thing. It's a very simple thing. You
Well, and
work
this is
within their capacity.
yeah, and this is the thing. When you go and you get a physio degree or you get like a doctorate, you start to make shit more complicated than it needs to be, right?
Mm.
Probably to save your own ego, partially because the business model is a shitty business model, and like the how do I keep, like I was fortunate enough to have this kind of belief that either I wanted to try to put myself out of business, and by putting myself out of business, by doing a good job, it would grow. And also, like, people need coaching. I also think this, having a coach in your corner that you trust, and that, kind of an impartial person, or that really learns you, and that's super powerful. And I'm not saying everybody needs that, but like, that's more how I wanted to practice. But that also requires a
Mm,
high amount of kind of self-confidence, right? Like, I think you seem like you're self-confident with who you coach and how you coach. That takes time to develop, and it's not easy. And I think that's another big thing. So, um
yeah. To speak to that for a second with that self-confidence piece, I think that what a lot of coaches need to boost that self-confidence is like I have a very clear point at which I'll say, I don't know. Here's somebody who knows more about this. Go to
yeah,
them, especially with rehab and pain. Like there's a lot of things and injuries and niggles that I am super comfortable dealing with. But as soon as I have an inkling that the next choice I make, I'm not 100 or at least not 99% confident in, I'm referring out almost instantly. Like, give me a hamstring tear, very happy to rehab that.
yeah,
Even give me a bulging disc, very happy to rehab that. Someone has nerve pain going down their arm, I am not doing
yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah,
going to someone else.
yeah. Well, and I think it's even just it's okay when you get a whiff of the person needs somebody. Like, you got to have people that you trust in your circle, because you don't want to send them to some
100%.
shitty doc that's like, oh, you're jacked up, right? But once you get a whiff of like, I think they need kind of a second opinion, especially if you're a coach. Like, if you're a coach and you want to refer people to me, and like we trust each other, it's a really good working relationship. And then same thing for me and like specific doctors or XYZ. Um, I'm probably like overly optimistic on everybody's ability to rehab, which isn't always, it's probably toxic. Like, you can get better, but I also kind of believe that to some extent, depending on what we're going through, right?
Mm,
Depending on ruling out red flags. But you're absolutely right. Like, one of the most beneficial things, if your realm is coaching, is to just have people in your pocket. Know what you're good at, know what you trust yourself to do, and then have people in your pocket, right? So no, I appreciate that a ton. Um, all right. So what are you working on for yourself? What are your goals now? How old are you? You just got married. Congratulations. How
thank you,
old are
thank
you?
you.
What are you working on for yourself, from an athletic and a business standpoint? I'm just curious.
So I am 26.
Gosh, you seem so mature.
For Thank you. I appreciate that. It was actually really funny. As a quick backstory, the first job I had working as a coach, which was really the first, like I've only really ever worked for as a coach. Like I worked in my family's coffee shop when I was young, but this is the only thing I've ever done as a career. Because I was so young when I first started, I had to go back through and delete all the high school photos off my Facebook account because Facebook was like the touch point for the business.
Yeah.
And I couldn't have photos of me like just chilling in high school at my graduation, like being a year ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm 26. Over the next year, I don't know if my partner's gonna smack me for this, but I really want to open a facility.
Yeah.
And opening a facility in Melbourne is the goal that we're pushing towards over the next little bit. Um, Alongside shifting my demographic more and more to athletes and
Yeah.
shifting. Like I'd love to manage a sports team's S&C. I really want to get my hands on some more track athletes to do their S&C work, and just shift more into that realm. Alongside, I really hope for next year to be the mentorship and seminar push because I think I spent the last couple of years accumulating my own model and I feel comfortable in that model now to share it as a useful tool. And I
Yeah.
think that they're the big things on the business side of things that I'm looking to push towards in the next, 12 to 24 months. And personally, get below a 12-second 100 after the incredibly upsetting 12:01 that I pulled at my last race.
Damn, that's rough. That's hard. Well,
it was a fart away, a fart.
yeah, dude. You were literally so close. No, I mean, I love those goals. I think they're huge. I think the facility aspect, it's such a draw. Like, I think anybody who wants to be a coach, wants to be a physio, who, like I'm more of a coach doing rehab type of thing, but the facility piece is it's one of those things I think you got to really tease out like this is what I want and then why do I want it? And I think it's such a good goal, but like um, I've wrestled with that decision for or with what do I want like that for a long time, and so I
Mm,
wish you well. I think you're right by saying your partner is going to be like who knows how because it's like just it's a really awesome thing, but the getting there is such a big thing, right? And depending on your level of perfection around what it looks like and how
mm,
that's the tricky part too. So super cool. I am curious like as far as like the evolution of your model, right? Like,
mm.
um, I don't know how briefly you can tell me and the 25 people who are gonna watch this. Uh, I'm growing it. But like, yeah, give me like an overview of kind of how you develop your model and like when and what you hope to convey with it, if you don't mind, unless you want to keep that proprietary for your seminars and whatnot.
No, I think given the chance to explain it succinctly, I'll always jump at that opportunity. I think for me, the basis that I wanted the model to work around is I wanted a really clean modular system that can fit into specific performance and for general training needs. Because I think that both of those demographics need the same things arranged differently. And I wanted on the general side for it to just be essentially a session plan to be able to say you start with some sort of exploration, you work through some accelerative work, you do some extended action lifting, and at some point during the week, do some enduring cardiovascular activity. And you could make that a session block, and every session, if you train 3 days a week, can be exactly the same in those blocks. You change the stimuli, you have a great plan to follow. Any coach can pick it up and make sure their athletes and their clients are going through some sort of good training. And then on the athlete side, I want it to be a framework to be able to separate and to moderate the ability to. Now is a bad sentence. I want them to be able to separate the qualities and be able to track them more effectively, is a better way to put it. To
I
be
got
able to
you.
say, cool, this athlete needs no exploration because they've been training for 15 years and they're very aware of where their body's at and they're strong and they can do all these things. They don't need to do all these little bits of work to help them move better. They need to dump all of their training stimulus into accelerative work because they're running 11 meters a second and we want them to run 11.1 meters a second. So I wanted it to be that. And the basis of the model is it's like a little quadrant, and you've already had so many models of those quadrant based things where it's like you have your qualities,
We
you
like it.
dole
We
them out
like the
this way.
quadrants. We like the quadrants. It's just it's for some
It's
reason.
organized.
Yeah.
It's nice. So it'll be broken down into exploratory, which is just your general, I call it non-stimulation work, like any activation drills you want to do, any basic gymnastics you want to do, anything that's going to improve quality of movement to some extent, put you in new positions in new ways, which has a lot of value for many populations. The next one's the accelerative work, which is just how quickly can you produce a maximum impulse of power in lots of different contexts, be it elastic, be it just concentric. This is all of your general Ollie work, your plyometrics, all of that jazz. If you're accelerating something, lives in there. Extended action, general strength work, higher amounts of tension on a tissue, slower movement, general strength work, general hypertrophy, and then enduring, anything over 7 seconds lives in there. Any
Yeah.
activity over 7 seconds
Yeah.
goes to there.
I like it.
And that's the cliff notes.
Yeah. Who Anna Wisnowski said that like you were like somebody who's really good at like basically like making models or helping kind of people think through their training. Because I think that's one of the things I've taken away from multiple people. So it's like you know, if you're a coach, you should take time to develop your own training model and then just evolve it, right? Like
Yeah.
and I like at one point I'm like, well, why do I need to do that? There's so many things out there. But like the deeper you dive into why you want to do things and what matters, usually the better you can actually kind of convey your why. And I also just and that's so much of what you're trying to do with people is just give them the clarity. Like, because really, like, why do people succeed? when they're working with a coach. Like, yes, the training's good, but like they understand why they're doing what they're doing and they can put their intent into it, right? And
Mm.
you're not beating the shit out of them. But also, like, you can beat the shit out of people. You can beat the shit out of people, and if they're enjoying it, they're still gonna make good progress. And then some of it's just like, well, why are we doing this? Like there's always that, like, if the person you're working with, you don't want to do that. Like, it's just, it really comes down to, like, when people believe in what you're doing because you're conveying it well, like, usually good stuff happens. That it still means you have to make good decisions, right? But like, um, it's the understanding of what you're trying to do is huge. So I love that. No, super cool. I appreciate you dropping it. I'm gonna think about it and try to dissect it a little bit for myself. Yeah, I think you've just clearly dove,
Dived.
dived. I think you've just clearly dove deep into elements that people almost just take for granted. Like, oh, we're doing speed strength. Oh, we're doing like XYZ. And it's like, well, what the hell does that mean? Right. And like, how do we
Yeah.
actually demonstrate these qualities? And the last thing I kind of want to end on before I let you go, because I appreciate your time. I kind of like to keep these to an hour. I could talk for a long time. I'm sure you could. But like, you mentioned like exposing people to a variety of stimuli and then like seeing kind of what you get from that, right?
Mm.
I think I can't remember which quadrant that was in, but maybe it was in all the quadrants.
Exploratory.
The exploratory. Yeah, exactly. That makes sense. But like, why is that so? And we kind of touched on it, but why relatively simple. Why is that so important for the overarching training process? And because a lot of people don't really do that. They kind of figure out like what they like and what they're good at, and then they kind of try to live there for too long. And that's kind of my thought on it. Well, what would you say?
So for me, it goes to the point that a lot of people now are skipping playing sports. So
Yeah,
you have a massive population now which never did anything when they were younger, so they missed a lot of this really crucial formative development in their youth. They've gone straight into training at the gym and they lack some of these basic motor skills and movement patterns. And I think that's why there's this big shift, especially on social media, like to this play element within training. And I think that that play element, I like the idea of it. I think that if someone was very active as a child, played at least 5 different sports, and they've done all this physical training up until their, young adulthood, that element becomes almost, it's not important.
yeah,
But for populations who haven't had that, it becomes way more intricate because they don't necessarily know how to leave the ground,
yeah,
how to gallop, how to jump, how to roll, how to do all these things that I was a kid falling out of trees.
yeah,
I learned to roll from falling from falling on
yeah,
the ground.
yeah,
As an adult, I probably don't need to do that.
yeah. At least as much. You maybe just want to keep it in your repertoire, right? Like, yeah, but yeah, I think that's a really good point. The everything like the longevity has now become like, hey, let's train like a pansy, and it's like, no, that's not how you build, right? But like, the same thing with kind of play. Like, I love to play. Like, I was dunking on my 9 foot. I have a basketball hoop, and I've never really been vertically inclined, but just trying to dunk on a 9.5 hoop is like fun. And I'm like, it was with a volleyball, granted, but it's actually just the task is fun, and it's like I'm learning how to jump better than I ever did because I've like broken it down. And but people just stop doing that. They just go to the gym, they do their, and I also kind of hate the current trend of like, don't train like a bodybuilder. I'm like, that kind of what do we, what does that look
It
like?
swung too far.
Yeah,
But the thing that I love that you just said then, and I really hope this, I'm probably going to turn this into a post. I'm going to be honest. Play can't and shouldn't be programmed. As soon as
yeah,
it's programmed, it's not play. If you
yeah,
write 10 sets of jump over a box in a different way, it's not, go play with your kid.
yeah,
Go
yeah,
play a game of pickup with your friends. Do
yeah. Just
actually
go.
play.
Yeah, go dunk on your hoop for 15 minutes. Like, just get as many, like, because even that, it's kind of close. Like, get as many quality. Like, I think I will say that I think I'm going to challenge you. I think you can program it but it's just got to be like the most loosely, like, hey, I have like a bunch of those hurdles, and it's just like go set up like a bunch of them in a row and try to jump over them as many times as you can, right? But once it becomes like structured, time oriented, it's like no, this is not learning in the way that I want. And you're right, like
I can
dude,
agree with that.
like playing I haven't really got to do it since we had our kid, which is fine, but there's tennis. I can play it's like just situational games. It's so fun. And man, it's like it brings out that athleticism that you just lose because you're not playing stuff like that. And people need more of that. A, because it's fun, B, because it's challenging, but like C, because you know, tennis is probably, in my opinion, one of the most impressive sports when you think about the demands and the skill involved and how long they'll play
Mm,
for.
it's
And
nuts.
it's wild. It's super fun, but it's been really fun. So I'm with you there. Um, it's hard to be like, this is my last caveat. It's hard to be like as a coach, go play, go do something. Like people are like,
Yeah,
what do you want? You know?
100%. I think
Yeah.
that like you can't you can't do it without some sort of friends as well. It's
Yes.
like every time, like if I go to Brandon's gym, like sometimes they'll have like groups of school kids that will teach ollie lifting too, or before seminars and stuff like that. He has like a bunch of shuttlecocks in the gym and two
Yeah.
badminton rackets, and we'll just plow these, like we'll just do the dumbest game of badminton with no net in a gym full of equipment. It's the best. You end up
Yeah.
on the floor, you're doing a bunch of dumb stuff, you smack it as hard as you can, as high as you can. It's stuff like that which I think these qualities are shown in.
Yeah.
But I will go back a little bit and say, yeah, okay, if you want those elements in there, you probably have to give people some direction. You can't just
Yeah.
say 15 minutes play and they're just standing in
Yeah.
a Gold's gym, just think
Well, you just
what
need
are you
it's
talking about?
just make up games and play, right? Do you follow Austin
I
Jokum?
do, yes.
Like I think what he has built as far as his like facility, especially for athletic populations who aren't necessarily like Olympic lifting or even track oriented, just people who want to like be
Mm,
athletic and feel good, like what he has done is genius. It's also like so contrary to what like so many gyms anymore, and fitness is like it's so structured it almost sucks the life out of the fun of any of it, right? And
yeah.
he's like, no, like we're just gonna play spike ball for 30 minutes, or we're gonna play basketball for 30 minutes, and then we're gonna go get our lift.
And
You know, it's
that's a great implementation, and because there's a group of people who are bought into it,
yeah,
they will give everything to whatever like short-sighted game they're playing. Like
yes,
I think that's a really good application of it. That's a
yes,
really good application of it.
yeah, I love it. All right, man. Where can people find you?
So people can find me. I put pretty much everything through Instagram, just Zac_Kongonis. If you type in KONG after Zach, you'll probably find me.
I love it. Zach coaches, he's got the exploratory movement guide, he's got links on his profile. He does coaching, he does consultations, so check him out. Obviously we just spent talking, really smart guy, cares about training, seems like he cares about human beings, so that's good too. But yeah, man, I appreciate you being on. This will be up in the not too distant future. I just put a cover on it and let it rip, so I'll tag you in it.
Easy.
But man, appreciate your time. Go have fun down in Melbourne. Do you surf or anything like that down there?
Nah, I'm too close into the city. I grew up on the coast near Sydney.
Okay.
Never learned to surf. One of my biggest regrets.
Man,
Bad Australian.
there's still time. There's still time. All right, man. Appreciate you. Have a good night. Okay? Or have a good day. I'll talk to you later.
Cheers, brother. You too.
Peace.
Catch ya.